Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to our webinar today. We're excited to have Daniel Palmer from Innovia Consulting joining us. His session today is titled Word Layout Content Controls. And before I pass it over to Daniel, I'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded and it's going to be posted to our on-demand webinar library so that you can review it again or share it with anyone who you think would have an interest. If you have any questions along the way, there's a question box to the side in the GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to type in your questions and we will get them answered in a brief Q&A after the session. So with that, I will pass it over to Daniel to kick off the presentation.
Thank you very much. Again, my name is Daniel Palmer. I'm a developer with Innovia Consulting. I've been here for about 3 years. So I will be discussing word layouts, specifically the content controls. I'll go into a little detail on how to access word layouts and differences between word layouts and RDLC layouts, but there are quite a few webinars out there with that information, so I will be focusing mostly on the content controls. So again, my name is Daniel Palmer. That's what I look like. And yes, so the first bit is, what's the difference between word layouts and RDLC layouts? Which is easier to work with? What are the advantages and disadvantages of each? And I will proceed from there and give you guys a little bit of detail on them. So for an RDLC layout, this is the original way layouts functioned in NAV. Up until about 2015, 2016, the word layouts were introduced. The advantages of the RDLC layouts are really the alignment, and there are some more advanced features that you have access to. So you can actually write VB code on the layout itself, which is necessary in some situations because of the cons listed below, specifically the data handling on the header fields. Passing information to the header is surprisingly difficult sometimes. What I mean by that is if you have, say you're printing 3 invoices at a time, and you want, obviously, the header information to match the body information, you actually have to pass information from the body back to the header so that those stay in sync. Otherwise, you'll have the first invoice will be the header information, and you'll have 3 invoices print all with the same header information, and the bodies will be correct. So that's one major drawback of the RDLC layouts. Some of the advantages is really the more advanced functionality you have with it. You can really customize them, but there's a difficult and unpleasant learning curve to RDLC layout development, which brings me to the word layouts. They are much easier and quicker to update. Most of your users are probably already familiar with them, which contributes to the learning curve in a very positive way. I found there's a couple things that are a little tricky off the bat, and I'll talk through those when I'm actually showing you the word layouts. But the cons, there's not as much support for some of the more advanced functionality. For example, you can't really write code in a word layout. That's just not supported. The alignment, if any of you have tried to make a Word document look really perfect and you move something and it moves 2 other things, that happens with word layout alignment when you're working with them. So just something to keep in mind. Always grab a backup, because at some point you're going to make a change and it's going to break something else and you want to jump back to that. There's a couple ways around the cons here, and I will be discussing those as well. So on the surface level, they appear to be limitations, but there are workarounds for these cons here. So content controls, what are they? They define the report parts responsible for displaying NAV data. So there's a number of things on your report that would be standard data. So it's not going to change regardless of what comes from NAV. And so those are going to be just text boxes on your report layout. Those do not have content controls. It's just going to be set text on that layout. Content controls also handle repetition. So if you have lines on a document, sales lines, for example, you're going to have one sales line showing on the layout, but that will repeat if you have multiple lines on your actual sales order. So I'm going to show you guys, let's drag this over. So this is an example of a posted sales invoice. This is customized, so this is not quite what it's going to look like if you just go to grab this. But the first thing to note is what your options are for adding a content control. So if I click on invoice, this does not have a content control attached to it. But if I click on document number, you'll see this little piece pop up here. It says nav header / document number. And so this is saying this data is coming from nav. It is coming from the header data item. On the right-hand side, you see this XML mapping pane, and there is a header here. So I'm going to collapse this. That is the major data item for this report. So if I expand that, I can see there's document number in here. Should be down a little bit. There's document number. So this is the data item corresponding to document number over here. If I go down a little further, we have line, which is going to be your invoice lines for this specific report. And then there are content controls available for each of those. And then there is a further level here for shipment lines. So when you go to actually add a content control, there are two ways you can do that. The first is clicking on an existing content control. If I want to change document number to something else, I would click on the item I wanted to add, right click it, and I go to insert content control. There's a couple options here. Excuse me. Rich text is going to support different fonts, bolding, italics, the whole 9 yards. You can set something to rich text. You can highlight it on the on the layout. So you'll see down here there's this remaining amount, and that is highlighted, and that will show up highlighted because this is not plain text. If I did not need formatting, I would go to the plain text option. That is exactly what it sounds like. No fonts, nothing. That is just text. The pictures, pretty self-explanatory. If you need picture data here, for example, this is the company picture. You see that on the data item there. The content control, that header company picture. The checkbox, combo box, and honestly, the checkbox will display a Boolean, yes, no, as a checkbox. The other three of these are not really relevant to report layout design. These are things that you would use if you have a form that you want to have an actual user fill out. So maybe you have a template and they come through and they select drop downs on some of these things. So those aren't really relevant for what we're doing today, so I won't go into too much detail. But it's good to know they're there. Let's put that back there. So actually adding one specific item to a content control is pretty straightforward. Again, you just right click it and you say map to selected content control. Insert content control is if there is not already a content control you're going for. This will update one. So if I go ahead and update that, you'll see my bill to customer number is now there. I'm gonna go ahead and revert that, but that is how you map to existing ones. And then wanted to go into some detail on the repeaters. So for my sales invoice here, all of the header information is coming from this header item. And it is as straightforward as setting the item I want here to match the content control on the layout. It's a little more complicated for repeating lines. If I click on this item number line here, you'll see you have two of these content controls there. So one of those is responsible for displaying the item number on the line. The other one is responsible for looping through the lines. So I'm going to start by just removing this content control, and I will remove this content control. So now if I ran this report, it would just spit out this exact text here, and we don't want that. We obviously want the item number on the line showing up, but we also want it showing up multiple times. So first step is to set the content control here. So let's go to our lines a little bit further down. And here is the field I want in there. That was the original one that was in there. So I'm going to go map to selected content control. And then if I click in here, it actually didn't take that, did it? I'm gonna go ahead and just delete this. I'll add it back in. I think the reason, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I had deleted that content control, and then when I said insert or map to selected content control, it wasn't actually a content control I was trying to put it in, so I need to add a new one in here. So I'm going to do this one in as plain text, and you see now I have this content control indication here that is being controlled. So if I ran the report now, I will get one item number. It will not repeat. It will not care if I have a set of items, if I have more than one line. So to get this, oftentimes you'll have data in these boxes as well. So I'm going to just highlight all of this, and I will right click on the line. And if I go to insert content control for this one, it is going to just have the repeating option. And now you'll see it added in that second content control, and that's what's responsible for the looping. All right, so that's the gist of the content controls. I wanted to discuss totaling as well. The totals can be a little bit tricky, specifically with Word reports. This is an issue that was not around with RDLC layouts, and that is with totaling. So previously, I could say, maybe we have an amount value in here. There's a content control. Let me go ahead and add one. If there's one convenient line amount, I bet that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a content control here. So now I have my line amount on the line. And if I wanted this box to represent the total of all of the line amounts, and then there's a total down here, but maybe we want a subtotal and then some other stuff. So originally you could set that in an RDLC layout. You could say add up this box, put the total in this box. That is not available in a Word layout. It does not support that type of processing within the layout. And so there's a workaround that exists on these reports. And the workaround is modification to the object in nav. And so if I click on this total down here, you'll see it is pointing towards this header totals. And so instead of having that totaling exist on the layout, that calculation is done at the report level in nav code. And so I will have a separate totals data item down here. So let me collapse my line here. All of these items are tied to the header. So I can collapse the header and all of those will go away. The totals, so you'll have your header and you'll be able to calculate all of the totals within nav. And then that information is stored in this separate data item. So most of the reports that have word layouts built into them, for example, the sales invoice report, I did not have to add this. This was already existing it was built into the nav report code. So a lot of times you'll see the posted sales invoice. I don't know if it still does. I know up until about 2018, there were two sales invoices available. The first one was called, it was just the regular posted sales invoice. The second report was a mini posted sales invoice. And the reason there were two reports in nav instead of having one report with two layouts was were these totaling data items. There was no way to do the totaling as it had been done traditionally. And so that was all added in as a separate totaling data item. And so if you are noticing that maybe you have a variable in code and you're updating it and you put it on the layout and it's not really taking the value you think it will. For example, I actually had somebody contact me wondering why their total wasn't working. They had put it on, they put a total down that would have been right around here, and it was showing the value from the first data item, or excuse me, from the first line. So it would total it at least once, and then it would stop there. But if you printed that variable out at the end of the report processing, it would show you that it came up with the right value. It just didn't update it on the layout. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is if you have a total or something like that, your code should be within this totals, and it should essentially create that totaling separate from the rest of the nav code. So you don't want to rely on the data item structure or anything like that. I mean, it seems easy and simple to just add in a variable at the line level and say each iteration through, each time we encounter a new line, maybe we just add amount excluding that. So we're summing up this value, but what you'll find is you can sum this value up and you'll put that on the layout, and that will show you the total from just the first line. And that's kind of a frustrating issue if you don't know what you're looking for. So one thing that I wanted to point out specifically was that totaling. All right, at this point, I would like to open it up, see if anybody has any questions, and if there is anything that I can go into more detail on these items.
Yeah, so feel free to use the question box on the side of GoToWebinar, and we'll get those answered for you. I do have a couple to start off. So Daniel, how do you add the developer button to your ribbon in Word?
Oh yeah, that is, let me pull this back over. So it's not going to display by default. You need to go to, let me see, it's under options. So you do file options, and then there is this customize ribbon option down here. And then in here, you will see developer is right here. It will not be checked by default, so you'll just need to check that box. And then you go ahead and say okay, and it'll show up here. And the XML mapping pane will also not be available, so I'll close out of that. When you get the developer pane added, or the developer tab added, you'll have this XML mapping pane option, and it'll show you all of the data available from NAV. And these are all defined within the report itself, within the report in NAV.
Great. Another question is, how do I access a field on a word layout if it's not available on the XML mapping panel? Or I'm sorry, the pane.
Yeah, sure. Let me jump in. I'll pull over a report from inside NAV, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. So if I put this on my screen here. So this is what the report will look like from the NAV end, and you'll see all of these columns. So the first one, this, maybe I should go, this will work. So that the header information that I showed you would look kind of like this, and you'll have columns for all of the header info. If there's something that you're not seeing in your XML mapping pane, you'll need to add it in here as one of the columns at whichever level is appropriate. So if it's on the header, or maybe it's on the lines, those will be at different stages on here. So they'll, like the lines would be indented out. And this is not a posted sales invoice, so these data items are a little different, but this is what it would look like. So you'd have your header and your header information, and then an indentation to indicate that looping, and then you'll have your line information here. So you can add in, whichever fields you want from the line. By default, you are going to have, if I go back to my word layout, you're going to have access to, I would say, most of what you need. I definitely do run across some requests for data that's not available by default. So you may need to do a modification to the report within NAV, and that would not be touching the layout. It would just be updating that information in NAV. And then when you go ahead and save it and compile it, you can export a new copy of your word layout, and it will have your new data item in there.
Excellent. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have for now, but as we're closing, if something occurs to you, I'm still taking a look at it. But thank you, Daniel, for your presentation today. And whether you're joining us live or if you're watching us on demand, we thank you for joining as well. We have several more webinars coming up soon that you won't want to miss, starting with next Tuesday, July 7th. Marguerite from Inovia Consulting will be presenting on the value of vendor ratings and JET reports. That's going to be at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. You can register for that now. And then on July 14th at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern, Jenny Hollingsworth and John Grant will be continuing their Manufacturing 101 Business Central series with the session all about shop loading. So you can check out these webinars and get registered and see some more at inovia.com/events. The next thing I wanted to touch on was the podcast that Inovia has going on right now. It's called the Inovia Conversation. Our hosts, Steve and Jeff, put out about 2 episodes per month for various Business Central related topics. You can find out all about what they have going on and all the platforms that you can access the podcast at inovia.com/podcast. And then lastly, Inovia Consulting is proud to be a premier sponsor at Community Summit, which will be coming up October 6th through 9th in Nashville, Tennessee. Summit is the annual gathering for all Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central and NAV users and supporters. The event is full of great sessions to help you develop your leadership skills, improve your NAV BC skills, and learn how to get more from the investment your company has made in your product. So check out our conference page. That's inovia.com/conferences for more details. And there's also an opportunity to save on your summit registration. Oh, it looks like we did have a question come out. Let me
Oh
pull it
yeah,
up.
that is a fantastic question, and I did mean to circle back to that. So no, you did not miss the question. I missed the answer. So the difficulty that I'm talking about, and this is actually a good example, is this report here. So I have these 3 boxes, bill to, ship to, and remit payment to. And if I wanted to, say I want to shrink the space between these boxes, it doesn't really let me do that. I'll revert that, and let me try this one more time. I just want to make a little less space in between the box, and it looks like it'll let me, and it pushes it up here. So if you want to have very specific control over where these boxes line up, and you'll see this in the default Word layouts that Microsoft has put out. They have, and it takes a little longer to do it, so I'm not going to actually go through it now, but basically what you would want to do is make one table that spans the entire width of this, and you can add, maybe you have like 30 columns in there, and you can merge maybe columns 0 through 8. 9 and 10 would represent the space between these. You would merge 11 through, my math is going to get thrown off at some point, but the gist is create a table, and you can specify exactly where you want this information. So looking down at the information on the lines, I believe I can, it may be a little tricky because it has that bottom piece. So if I highlight 2 of these columns, be a better example. Let's see. It doesn't like the merge. The merge cells is what I was going for. Since it has this bottom box in here and this one's merged a little differently, it doesn't like what I'm trying to do. But essentially what you're going to do is create a table, and you'll be able to merge the cells together to get things lining up as you're hoping. And it can get, if you open up one of the, I think report 1306 is a good example. They will have a very large table on the layout, and it looks like most of it is not used. So they'll have the information in the exact spots they want it, and that is constrained by that table. So that is a good way of making sure everything lines up very well. It saves you a lot of frustration trying to line things up. So like, again, like if I try and move this anywhere, it just doesn't do it very well. And that's one thing that can be a little frustrating with working with Word layouts is, maybe I just wanted to make this a little bigger, but left side disappeared. So it's stuff like that that can cause a little frustration. But again, in my experience and from what I've seen with Microsoft and how they do it, the best way to make sure this whole document lines up is to put as much information into tables as you can. So I was not the one who originally created this layout, but if I were to do it, these 3 boxes would all be members of the same table, and I would be able to really carefully define, I want these cells merged together to make one bigger one here for the data. And then maybe I'll leave this cell, and that cell represents the spacing. And you can, like, if you see, I can shrink these, I can expand them. But if I try and do that same thing with the standalone boxes, it just doesn't work as well. So that's really what I was getting at, was put things into a table whenever possible. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because I did very much want to convey that information.
Great, thanks. Looks like he had a follow-up question. He said, how about using VBA to move and position the elements?
VBA, I have not done that myself. If that's something that you have had success with working within Microsoft Word to align things, I think that's probably a good route to go. These Word layouts will behave just like any other document in Word. So if that's something that you've had experience with, I'm actually going to make a note to dig into that in case I've learned something here at this webinar.
Well, he says that, yes, he has used VBA in the past, and he can connect with you if you'd like. I can certainly provide contact details to you there, Daniel.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I would definitely like to have that conversation. That may make my life easier moving forward.
He says, I would also suggest turning on the view formatting option.
View formatting. I'm not seeing that. Wonder, that may be something that I don't have displayed right now. View formatting.
Home tab, maybe? You see? Paragraph mark looking thing.
Paragraph mark.
Oh, I think that's what he said.
There it is. Yes, that also may be worth having on. I'm going to play around with that, because I've not used this setting, and it may have some helpful information in it, just as far as the formatting goes.
Awesome. All right, I'll make sure that Daniel gets the email address you submitted there, and then we'll kind of go from there. But thanks to everyone for attending, and thank you again, Daniel, for the presentation.
My pleasure.
And we hope everyone has a great day.